primary way God guides us is through his word. And the reading of the word transforms us. But the key phrase in the Old Testament, particularly and the New, is the word of the Lord came to whoever. And so when we read the scriptures, the Spirit will just sometimes go kaping and hit us with it. And that's the word of the Lord coming to us. Or sometimes a prophecy will come from somebody else. And I've had some moments where, people have shared words with me and they've been quite transformational in life redirecting. Okay, so that's the word of the Lord coming. And this is true north, okay? If we think, and this is very objective. It's God speaking within us, but it's also God speaking, and it's not about our voice. It's actually us learning to discern, oh, God is talking. And we have to learn that our whole lives, okay? But the other objective element, which is not within us, is this whole thing of circumstances. Where, okay, if God says you're going to be healed and you don't get healed, then God didn't say that. And the circumstances may not immediately line up. In fact, sometimes circumstances take quite some time to align. But if they never happen, maybe we didn't hear right. And so one of the things I want to highlight here is that God outworks guidance in life, and it will impact the circumstances of our lives. And if it doesn't happen, we have to say, did I hear right? Okay? Because we can't have this word from God and God said all this stuff, and if none of it happens, that was just wishful thinking. Okay? So there's this tension between God speaking and realizing those things. Now, when God speaks, things will have to change, and that's why sometimes we have to pray because circumstances will change and align to what God says. So those two things will work together, but there is a tension between them. Okay? And generally speaking, when God really speaks a directional word to us, this will take time to outwork. It won't instantly happen. And we need to get out of this instant stuff because actually God's directing a whole life shape. He is not just, God won't speak every minute for our whim. He is actually trying to shape our life direction. Okay, so those are the two things we looked at last week. This week I want to look at vocation and community. And these are more internal and emotional. If you look at the Word of God, that's objective, kind of. And circumstances are objective. These things are much more about our personhood and about our relationships. So what I want to emphasize right now is that hearing God speak and responding to God is not an individualistic pursuit. It's not me and Jesus and nobody else. If you want to navigate into your good God future, you actually have to involve other people in it. And there is no way that you're going to find your way on your own. Just want to assure you of that. That may not be good news to you, but actually God is utterly committed to us being a we rather than a me. So what I want to look at is this whole concept of vocation, and then look at the role of community and guidance. And I feel like I've got lots to say, and I'm skimming. And I apologise like that right from the start, but running out of year, so it's just the way it rolls. Okay. Did you like that passage on David? Great passage, isn't it? Calling is an interesting thing, and the Latin word for calling is vocatio, from which we get our word vocation. Okay? And in this passage, God is looking for a king. And Samuel is sent to the family of Jesse, and he's looking at all these boys lining up, and he sees Eliab, who's obviously a muscular specimen, and God says, don't look on the external appearance, I look at the heart. And so God dismisses those 7, and then Samuel has to say, is there anyone else? And then they drag David in from the fields. And this is the one God has called. And They anoint him with oil, and as Samuel does that, the Holy Spirit comes on David and activates something. And from that moment, David is called and he's anointed, but he doesn't become it for at least 17 years. And we like the instant, don't we? But God sets this person apart, and David is going to have a long journey, and a lot of his corners are going to get knocked off in that journey, and David's going to go through transformation because he is going to have to grow into this calling. When I said last week that when I was water baptized, I had got this word about being a teacher and stuff, and I thought it would happen soon. It's taken my whole life. And sometimes I wonder still, And so what I want to emphasize is calling is about the shape of our life. And that word vocatio, I like it because it's saying something quite deep to us, that we actually have a vocation in life. We have a calling from God. And our lives, when we respond to God, are responding to God's calling and his summons on our life. And for the rest of our days, we're going to live responding to the fact that we have been summoned by God himself and making sense of that. So what we're told is that when we are called, it's coming out of God choosing us. And I want to read something from Paul Stevens, who lectured me on this at Regent College when I studied. He said, experiencing and living by a calling provides a fundamental orientation to everyday life. A calling in Scripture is neither limited to nor equated with work. Moreover, a calling is to someone, not to something or somewhere. Now, I've always found it weird when somebody says, I'm called to be a pastor or I'm called to be a priest. I want to slap them, truth be known. Or I'm called to be a missionary, and often it's Christian things that we're called to. Have you ever been in a conversation, I'm called to be a plumber? They're equally legitimate. But we've got this kind of little bit of a hierarchy that we've created, and we've equated calling to something, whereas Paul Stevens here is saying a calling comes to someone before it becomes to something. And so when I have this encounter with God, I most of all, I feel called. And now I have to make sense of it. I feel accepted by God and fully like God is for me now. Now I actually have to make sense of the sense of I'm a called person. Now if we don't feel called and that God has chosen us, we will tend to be driven or lethargic. Either we won't feel like, I'm not special, or we'll drive ourselves to prove to everybody that we are special. Whereas actually, those extremes are not the Christian life. The Christian life is that when God comes into our life, he has called us, he has summoned us, and now we're living our lives through that lens that a call has come to someone, i.e. you and me. Does this make sense? So what happens to David in this moment is that he is called to kingship, and he's called by the Spirit because the Spirit's come upon him, and the rest of his life he's going to make sense of this. Now, we're in this moment, he doesn't know that he's going to radicalize Israel's worship and bring the ark into Jerusalem. He doesn't know he's going to prepare for the building of a temple. He doesn't know that he's going to establish the borders of Israel. He doesn't know any of this. He just knows that God has summoned him. And if we don't live out of that sense that God has called us, we feel like flunkies that are just making up numbers here. I want to suggest to you that when you said yes to Jesus, you said yes to God calling you. And the rest of our lives, we have to make sense of what it means to be called. So Os Guinness says, calling means that our lives are so lived as a summons from Christ that the expression of our personalities, our spiritual gifts, and our talents are given direction and power precisely because they're not done for ourselves, but to glorify God. So, I feel called to be a teacher, say. Now I have to make sense of that. I was a school teacher for a while, but was that it? Is it one-on-one? Am I going to do Sunday school? Am I going to go to, what am I going to do with that? Well, actually, that's the unfolding of God's will. We often don't get specifics, but in life we get to outwork and learn about ourselves and have experiences that shape our direction. So for me, becoming a Bible teacher involved me being in the classroom for 7 years. That grew my ability to teach because I had to survive 4WM on a Friday afternoon. You learn how to teach when you have to do that. You guys are very civilized compared to them. People who just go to theological school to become a minister don't realise actually that narrow grid of just learning theological stuff and trying. I think we should learn in life. We've got to grow in life. And so for me, teaching was just such a gift. I had to face me and all my insecurities and find God in it. And so when I actually did receive a call to be a minister, which I always felt I had, God had been working in me for some time, dealing with my insecurity and developing my talents. Okay? Hopefully. So what I want to say is that this whole thing of vocation is learning and facing you is part of guidance. You are such a part of guidance that you are probably the one who will screw it up. So if God comes to you and says, I really want you to do this, and you say, no, absolutely not. I don't want to be that person. If you've got a wrong view of you, you will never receive the word of God well. Can you see how there's a tension there? Remember God comes to Moses and said, I've called you to lead Israel and set them free. He said, no, that won't happen because I don't like to speak. I don't like being in front of people. And I'm really, really happy here in the wilderness where I hang out with nobody. I am an introvert. I will stay free from all those obligations. And God says, no, I want you. In fact, actually, God wrestled with him for 2 chapters, getting him to the place where he said yes. Even arranged a burning bush, for goodness sake. Okay, so what I want to suggest is that you have to be a student of you, facing you, and learning about you for the rest of your life. I'm not saying you're the end. You're not the end. But a call comes to someone. That's you. You've been summoned by God. So all of life is teaching you what you are and what you're not. So many of the things I've learned, I'm not an administrator. Okay? Number 2, I'm not a pioneer. I'm not good at starting things. In fact, I'm not good at ending things. I'm good at imagining things and seeing what could be. I'm really good at that. I'm terrible in small groups, but I'm quite good at one-on-ones. I know a lot about myself. You have to be a student of you because all this time where God's called us and he has to work with us. And so all our life experiences is honing an understanding of who we are so that, in the words of Elizabeth O'Connor, we ask to know the will of God without guessing that his will is written into our very beings. So God has wired you for glory. We're fearfully and wonderfully made, and everything about you is meaningful if you can embrace it rather than reject it. So vocation is us being called, and the world has rejected calling, though, and vocation, and it's come up with another thing. It's called career. You have to have a career. And it has to impress other people. Otherwise, they'll be unimpressed. So career is our way of managing our lives to achieve financial success and a good retirement. This pursuit of career is that we do everything to achieve what we want for our lives. Okay? So career, and I'm not questioning on some levels the fact that actually having a career is good, but only if it's truly your vocation. Because you can construct a life that's your career creation, but actually if you don't believe in it, and if it's not the longing of your heart. Actually, somebody talked to me last service, and they reminded me of a chat we had, and they talked about the fact that they'd been trained to be a doctor, and they hated it. So they were a trained doctor, and it's done nothing but make them unhappy. And she talked about a chat we had where I said, well, why are you bothering? And it almost gave them permission to pursue what they really wanted to do with their life, and they're so much happier because that career was a parent expectation. And because they were super bright, they trained to be a doctor, but it was joyless. So they had a career, but it had nothing to do with calling. Now, I'm not saying if you're unhappy in your job, you should ditch, okay? It's not what I'm saying. But you are learning things about in whatever you do that are telling you this is you or this isn't you. So everything should be treated as cannon fodder for calling rather than a resting place for the rest of your life. And so what we're trying to do is navigate true north by understanding who we are and who we aren't. So Myers-Briggs is useful. Enneagram is useful. Strength Finder is useful, because this is a voyage of discovering how God wired you for glory rather than how to make a buck. I would suggest that making a buck is important, especially if you've got a family, so don't think that is unimportant. But career is often about progress and provision, and it's material. Calling is about identity in the whole of our lives. So I want to encourage you to embrace vocation and what your true vocation is. And it may take you a while to figure it out, but we are meant to live our lives as summoned by God and looking through the lens that God has called us. And what does that mean for what I work at, for my relationships, for everything I do? And it may mean that you train in a sphere that you thought you would never do just because this is the summons of God for me. And so therefore I should do this and this. Okay? So we're seeing our life through the lens of calling rather than the lens of career. I do think God encounters where God speaks deeply to us are really important for developing vocation in us. I don't think I would have figured out who I am by myself without voices and without prophetic words. And I just want to read another quote from Ben Smith's book. He says, "Vocation is not so much found as it is negotiated as one carves a place within the greater community. We shape our purposes in terms of the needs and purposes of the community." And I think that's really important, that not one of us can carve out a vocation by ourselves. Now, I can decide I want to be a plumber, and I can Google things, and I can try and do it by myself. But it's just a toilet blockage away from hell. Okay? It could be a big, big mess if I decide I know how to do things just because I think I'm called to be a plumber. You just have to learn your craft. And when you start doing an apprenticeship, you really, really do the crap jobs. It's a bad pun, isn't it? You don't do the great stuff. You slowly learn your craft. You learn how to use the tools. And that's true of all calling. And you don't get anywhere instantly. We are all learning our craft. But we're in a Google world, and we think we can get everything instantly and become experts, so we're even self-diagnosing ourselves for our little sicknesses online, aren't we? I know you're out there doing it. Okay? It's really bad if you're a hypochondriac. There's just so much ammunition to be sick. Anyway, so the danger for us is to try and discover calling by ourselves. We do it by participating in community. Part of the intern's journey this year has been doing kids stuff, doing sound, doing all sorts of stuff discovering what's easy and what's hard. It's a great year to experiment with your own soul, to see, okay, I love this and I hate that. And you need to experience both, because learning what you hate is really helpful, because actually that's probably not a big part of your future. But we actually do this in community. I want to go to this last piece here. And so you can't do this without this. So every kind of work you do is always with people and for people, no matter how functional it seems. And one of the metaphors I like to use for church is it's meant to be a village. So I look at who my kids have become, and my kids are who they are, partly because of our family, and we have quite a strong extended family. But definitely the church shaped them profoundly. They discovered so much of who they were in our relationships, and in the people who mentored them and took an interest in my kids. And they discovered things about themselves and were able to do things that they couldn't have done in just our family. Church is meant to grow up kids. It's meant to be the village that, it takes a village to bring up a child. Church is meant to be like that. We are meant to be completely committed to each other's kids, to each other, and helping people discover who they are in community. And, it's really interesting that Jesus starts the church by calling 12 to live together and do life together. And numbers of them would have had families. It would have been really complicated, and that would have had to have been factored in the way they did this. And that's what it was. Jesus formed a community first, and within that community had an inner circle. Peter, James, and John were his inner circle. And he did a lot of life with those individuals, as far as we can tell from the gospel narrative. So I want to say to you, are you really in village? Or are you independent? Are you managing separation carefully so these Christians don't mess with you and make unreasonable demands? Because a lot of our spirituality is quite individualized, and we try and manage it to keep ourselves apart rather than with. And so part of being church is to be a village. But secondly, it's also, so the next question I want to ask is, who is your inner circle? Who's really in your life? So that you are actually doing life with somebody that actually knows what's going on for you emotionally and practically, so that you're not just surviving by yourself. I look at my life, and my life is deeply shaped by, and every period of my pilgrimage with God has been shaped by the people who've been in my inner circle. And I'm grateful to those people, and some of them are still the same. Like Andrew's still in that inner circle with me, But Jesus had an inner circle. Why wouldn't we? And until people actually know our lives and our secrets and our struggles, they're not in our inner circle. We've got them in there. They might be part of the village, but they're not in that inner circle with us. I want to suggest that if we're going to navigate our vocation, discovering who we are, we've got to let people in to journey with us. I've had a couple of mentors, people who've invested in me. I can never repay, but I can pay it forward. And I want to suggest that vocation is carved out in real relationships that have real accountability and enable us to flourish, because we are known and we belong. And until that level of relationship takes place, we're really still islands and still alone. The role of relationships is to create a context for counsel. Okay? So the role of community is to give us counsel, especially in the big decisions in life and in terms of navigating what are we called to and what is God saying to us. So we learn to draw counsel from people. Now, this is a foreign concept to us all, because most of us just collect opinions. What do you think I should do about that? What do you think I should do about that? What do you think I should do? And by the time you've got 17 opinions, you've got nothing because everyone said something different. And so you're pretty much toast. And you just do what you would have done anyway. Okay, that's called democracy. Okay, that was me being cynical, actually, but probably is. So if somebody says, what do you think I should do about this, and what's your opinion, I might say something, but I'm not committed to giving genuine feedback because actually they just want my opinion. But if they say to me, so what do you really think about this, that gives me a different level of permission, doesn't it? Now, I'll be careful to say, I'm not saying you should do what I think, but this is what I think. If you really want what I think, I'll tell you. And I won't say anything if I've got nothing. But if it's really obvious to me what I feel God might be saying to them, I won't say God's saying this. I'll say, I wonder about this. Because you don't want to create power in the conversation. It's got to feel like it's their life, so they've got to have the sense that they can make this decision. Otherwise, it's damaging. There's a really excellent proverb, if I can find it. Counsel in the heart of people is like deep water, but the person of understanding will draw it out. And what that's saying is that, like, say I'm looking at Dan here, and when we're in a conversation, what that's saying is that there's deep water in Dan. There's understanding in Dan, and it's up to me to draw it out. So he'll have understanding for me if I'm a person who wants to draw it out and draw counsel from him. I can get good stuff from him, or I could talk about the weather. Okay, does that make sense? But it says the person of understanding will draw it out. It's our responsibility to draw counsel out of others rather than collect opinions. If we're going to navigate life well, we need wisdom. And I said in the first week that I did this series that we've tended to think a step of faith is the way to make a decision. But biblically, wisdom is the way we make decisions. And drawing out the counsel of others enables us to make good decisions. That doesn't mean we do what they counsel us to do. That means that we take seriously their counsel and wrestle with it and face it, because it may say something that we haven't thought about. So part of community is the drawing of wisdom through counsel and processing with people who we respect. There's another proverb that I quite like. It says, it's the glory of God to conceal a matter. It's the glory of kings to search it out. And what that means is basically, God likes to hide stuff. He doesn't like it to be obvious, but he loves us to seek and find. But it's the job of kings to do that, i.e. there's a bit of maturity involved, there's a bit of learning involved. But God wants us to have this heart to seek out wisdom and to seek out his heart. And I think we actually do that in community together. And if we try and do it all ourselves, we end up in trouble. In terms of community, I think of, say, our marriage. I've never made one decision by myself. You can check that up with Carolyn if you like. We have this principle that unless we're agreed, we can't move. And it's a wonderful double check to actually think, okay, until we're both at peace, we can't move. I like to think that in all my decisions, that they're sensitive to the community I'm a part of, and that things that impact, because our decisions impact each other, that we actually learn how to do this well. Because if we're going to be a community, talking through our guidance and what God's saying must be a part and a feature of that, rather than keeping it secret, holding it tight, and just being another individualized modern person who actually ultimately lives in a secular world. We are to be a community of faith who help people discover vocation and discern what God is saying. Give counsel, but don't abuse power. We should be the safest people in the world. Okay, so we've got these 4 elements. The whole thing is to help us discern calling and what God is saying. And I've skimmed all this. There's a whole lot of stuff you could say, but I really want us to take seriously, most of all, that we are called. And it may take our whole lives figuring out the implications of what that looks like and what that's meant to mean. But we have to do this together. So may God bless you in your journey of vocation.